so.
Yeah.
1 o'clock. Perfect. I'll be down.
All right.
Katie will come.
I'm going to call to meeting this discussion of the Common Council.
Our president is talking.
You can't hear me?
Gavel?
I did gavel.
Gavel.
I did gavel, but you can't hear me. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming to this discussion. This is a format that the council hasn't used for quite a while. In fact, hasn't used since I've been on the council, which is almost 5 years now. So I realize some folks might be unfamiliar with it. So just some ground rules. It's a discussion. Nothing is going to be reconsidered tonight. There's not going to be any resolutions introduced. We're not voting on anything. So we get to essentially forego Robert's Rules of Order. But I am still going to ask you all to ring in on your microphones and on Zoom so that I can make sure that we get everybody. So the goal of tonight is to have a discussion amongst council and staff about the men's homeless shelter. Obviously, this is a very big project for the city to take on, and it's one for which we have some budgetary constraints that we're going to learn more about. This is a learning space, and my request is that everyone treat it as such. For those that are in the gallery, there is no public comment, but you are absolutely welcome to send questions or concerns to all alders or to your individual alder. And particularly if questions come up during the evening, you can send those questions in real time if you would like your alder or other alders to ask those questions. So with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to the staff for a presentation. Where am I going?
Light me up. All righty. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim O'Keefe. I'm here with Lynette Rhodes. Together we serve in the city's Community Development Division. It's a team of about 45 people within the Department of Planning, Community, and Economic Development. We have a lot of ground that we've been asked to cover. We've got a fairly lengthy presentation and slideshow, so ask that you bear with us as we work our way through it and hopefully leave plenty of time and opportunity for questions for things that maybe we don't cover or don't cover sufficiently. Just to give you a sense for what we want to try to do tonight, I want to provide a little bit of background and context. Want to describe our community's experience with homelessness, the system that is in place to address it here in Madison and Dane County. Want to revisit what we went through with respect to the response to COVID, how we're looking to come out of that experience stronger than ever, and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that lay before us. So again, within the Community Development Division that Lynette and I are a part of, we are responsible for a broad scope of work that mostly focuses on helping residents in this city who face barriers. Barriers often rooted in economic, social, and/or cultural disparities. And we work to help them gain access to some of the resources that can improve their quality of lives, whether it involves housing, employment and career prospects, quality youth programming, or support in times of personal crisis. Our work is organized around these 9 services, a number of which, as you can see, overlap or intersect with one another. We know that positive experiences early in life improve prospects for future educational and economic success, which can, for many, be helpful in securing and maintaining stable housing and becoming connected to community. The Community Development Division has an annual capital budget of nearly $20 million, which is dominated by our Affordable Housing Fund, which has been in place now for some 12 years. It's a big part of what we do in addressing homelessness. We emphasize in developments that we support that developers dedicate some number of units to very low-income people and support members of our community who struggle with gaining access or opportunities to housing. Under normal circumstances, our operating budget is only a bit larger. This slide reflects the last remnants of federal funding, about $15 million flowing through it. Without it, nearly a quarter of the money in our operating budget comes from ongoing federal and state sources. The Community Development Block Grant Program, for example, the HOME program. Generally, money provided for specified uses, and the rest is funded from property tax levy. And most of the levy, 70% or more, goes to support the work of community partners through purchases of services contracts, because we are not, I think you know, we are not direct service providers. We don't operate homeless shelters or neighborhood centers. We don't provide employment training or after-school programming. Instead, we collaborate with and support a network of community partners that do those things and more, and they do so, at least in part, with our financial assistance. So here's a quick look at the program areas among which those purchase of service contract funds are distributed. And tonight, of course, we're focused on one particular area, homeless services and housing stability. Work within it is very much connected to the city's broader housing plan, that plan that we know as Housing Forward. Among its many goals and objectives, Housing Forward calls for the development of full service, purpose-built shelter facilities that can provide safe, short-term emergency support and function as venues from which users can access resources helpful to regain stable housing. So a question for you. If you were asked how many people are homeless in Madison and Dane County, would you feel comfortable trying to give an answer to that question? Do you think the number might be about 800 people? Or would it be 3,000 people? How many people experience homelessness in our community? Seems like a simple question. If you said the answer to that question is about 800 people, that would be an acceptable response. But if you said it's about 3,000 people, that too would be an acceptable response. And in either case, you would be incorrect. That's because there are different definitions used to describe homelessness and different methods used to measure it, none of which are particularly precise. Perhaps the most important point to know is that the population of people experiencing homelessness is a very dynamic one, constantly changing as people move into and out of homelessness and into and out of Dane County, and therefore it is very difficult to measure with much precision. So we do the best we can, knowing that these measures are imperfect. One common definition of homelessness is that provided by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD uses the term literally homeless to describe those who lack a permanent home and are staying in emergency shelter, transitional housing, or a place not meant for human habitation, like a car or in a tent or on the street. It does not include people temporarily living with friends or family in so-called doubled up arrangements, or people paying to live in a hotel or motel, though many would also consider people in those circumstances as being homeless. HUD further describes somebody who's been without housing continuously for 12 months, or on at least 4 separate occasions during a period of 3 years, as chronically homeless. Many communities have adopted these definitions because they help determine, in part, who qualifies for certain types of federal housing assistance. HUD also requires every community to conduct an annual survey to count the number of persons experiencing homelessness, the so-called point-in-time survey. In the point-in-time survey, conducted on a single night in January, trained volunteers make an organized effort to determine how many people are literally homeless on that night, again, staying in emergency shelter or living in transitional housing or without shelter. Here in Madison, these efforts are much improved from past years, but because they make no attempt to capture all circumstances of homelessness, folks in doubled up arrangements or in hotels, motels, somebody spending the night in jail or at a hospital. The point-in-time survey clearly undercounts homelessness. And yet it is a widely accepted data point. And so when you read or hear about rates of homelessness around the state or country, these are most likely the numbers that are being presented. In Madison and Dane County, the point-in-time results have been relatively stable over the past 15 years, ranging from a low of 700 people in 2010 to a high of 855 in 2021. Like the rest of the country, the recent trend here is upward. Point-in-time counts have risen in each of the last 3 years. In January of 2025, the official count was 790. That's that 800 number that I mentioned earlier. The longer-term trend, 23% growth since 2009, closely tracks the 22% rise in Dane County's overall population during that same time. Point-in-time surveys occur during the late evening hours when people are likely to be settled into wherever they are spending the night. Volunteers try to collect information from and about people that they encounter, but as you might imagine, at that hour of the day, that is not always easy to do. But they are able to gather some useful data. We see, for example, that most people contacted this past January, 3 and 4 were single adults. We also know that population is growing older, nearly half were age 45 or above. And though families comprise only a quarter of those counted, children within those families count for 6 and 10 family members. And then there's this, the proportion of Black or African American residents in the homeless population is 7 times their representation in Dane County's overall population. What about where people were staying? As a survey is conducted in January, it comes as no surprise that most, nearly 90%, were staying in emergency shelters or transitional housing. That situation changes during warmer weather months when more people opt not to use shelter. It's a fact that was routinely borne out before the pandemic when point-in-time surveys were conducted twice a year, once in January and again in July. And because of the recent attention that's been paid to this issue, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that of the group of 94 people that are described as unsheltered in the 2025 point-in-time survey, nearly half of them were using the Dairy Drive campground or one of the Occupy Madison tiny house villages. So to recap, we're seeing mostly singles, mostly people in shelter settings. Our numbers are trending upward. There's disproportionate representation among African American residents and a significant occurrence in our community of chronic homelessness. And as for that nearly 3,000 number, well, it comes from a different measurement, the annual homeless assessment report that counts the number of people that have used emergency shelter or transitional housing services during the course of a year without regard to their length of stay. And it has ranged from about 2,600 to about 3,100 during the past 10 years. So what is the system that responds to homelessness in our community? I want to spend a few minutes talking about that system in Madison-Dane County that supports people who are unhoused. The system or network includes dozens of community partners who play different roles in providing direct services, in providing financial support. The city and county are themselves members of this network. They provide advocacy, and they offer insight that comes from lived experience. About 30 agencies share in federal, state, local, and private funding that is available to support their work. You may have heard the term continuum of care. It is used to describe the collection of entities, the local system that exists to support those who experience homelessness and provide the services that they need to acquire housing. Since 2009, the federal government has required local communities of care to plan for, coordinate, and measure the performance of local efforts. The Madison-Dane County COC, sometimes referred to as the Homeless Services Consortium, is one of 4 COCs in the state of Wisconsin. Our COC is led by an elected volunteer board of directors, which oversees efforts to develop collective goals and objectives, make decisions about how to allocate federal resources, establish community standards, and monitor system performance measurements. The Madison-Dane County COC is very fortunate to have Tori Kopp-Mueller, who is a CDD staffer that occupies a federally funded position whose purpose it is to provide support and coordinate the work of the board and the COC. So here's an outline of the major categories of services and activities with which the Madison-Dane County COC is engaged: supporting individuals and families in housing, working to keep them housed, and providing a safety net for those who lose their housing. We are active as a city in virtually all of these activities. Shelter services, certainly part of the system's crisis response. And just very briefly, this is the crisis response system locally. It provides separate shelter facilities for families anchored by the Salvation Army, and overnight facilities that provide shelter services serving single men and single women, a daytime resource center at the Beacon, and street outreach teams focused on working with people who are unsheltered. These are the 6 performance measures established by the COC to measure their progress. Basically, they're looking to monitor how many people experience homelessness, for what length of time, how many of them get connected to housing, and how successful they are when they are connected. There is approximately $16.5 million a year available to support this network. Nearly 40% of that comes from the federal government, most of which supports permanent supportive housing providers. Dane County, the City of Madison, and United Way account for most of the rest. So these are not big numbers. They do not include the large sums of temporary federal funds that we've had access to in recent years, nor do they reflect any additional funds that may be committed to operating the men's shelter in future years. Let's talk about COVID. I think it's safe to say that no single event has had more impact on our community's response to homelessness, short-term and long, than COVID-19. A quick look back. The COVID alarm rang in February of 2020, just in time, as it turns out, to cancel a vacation that I had scheduled out of state. You might recall the initial obsession with hand washing and social distancing, and the heightened concern over exposure among older adults and people with compromised immune systems. In 2020, the only men's shelter in Dane County operated out of the cramped basement of Grace Episcopal Church on the Capitol Square, and the Salvation Army served both families with children and single women at its property on the 600 block of East Washington Avenue. The city at that point had little or no financial stake in either facility. Their operators relied instead on modest contributions from county and state governments and support from the private sector. But it was city and county governments that rushed to respond when the ensuing public health emergency quickly exposed the deficiencies in the physical spaces on which our shelter system had relied. The county and city partnered with owners of newly idled hotels to offer shelter to hundreds of homeless residents deemed at greatest risk of infection due to their age or health conditions, moving many of them out of shelters and others off the street. One hotel property was set up solely to house and support persons infected or exposed to the virus. Salvation Army quickly removed families from its shelter and placed them into hotels to ensure their safety and to leave enough space to more safely serve single women. Later, the city acquired and converted a closed nursing home on Milwaukee Street for temporary use by the Salvation Army as a shelter for those families. It continues to operate to this day. Also, taking advice from federal health officials, we tried to support a handful of temporary permissible encampments. But when health and safety concerns emerged, most notably at the city's Rindle Park and the winter of 2021-22 closed in, we set up our own hotel to housing program and took the unique step of establishing Madison's first state licensed campground on Dairy Drive as a temporary alternative to shelter. Later, the city would take advantage of tens of millions of dollars of new but still one-time federal funding to help keep thousands of renters in their homes by subsidizing rent payments through the Dane Core program and by providing legal assistance to those facing eviction. To be sure, some of these initiatives involved expenditures of city tax dollars, but without question, few of them would have been possible without emergency federal funding that flowed to us. Very significant funding came through the American Rescue Plan, known as ARPA. ARPA delivered more than $47 million of one-time discretionary funds to Madison, requiring only that it be used to address public health needs, help those enduring economic hardship, or maintain essential government services in the face of declining tax revenues. I think it's worth noting that Madison's Common Council allocated a quarter of that total to support homeless services. And though this funding was one-time, available only through 2025, in fact, today is the last day that remaining funds are available for use, I cannot emphasize enough how impactful this funding was, how it dwarfed the limited funding that had previously been available, and how it enabled the city to play a crucial role in supporting people without or at risk of losing their housing. And I've only barely mentioned the men's shelter. So let's talk about the men's shelter. For more than 35 years, Porchlight Incorporated, a local nonprofit agency, operated the only men's shelter in Dane County from donated space in the basement of this church on the Capitol Square. The shelter's annual operating budget was less than $600,000. It served on average 90 guests a night in close quarters, more in the winter, fewer in the summer. And Porchlight had access to 2 overflow facilities for those occasions, typically in the coldest parts of winter, when they required more space. But their primary venue was in the basement of Grace Episcopal Church. Community groups, mostly faith-based organizations, prepared and served evening and morning meals. Often, a single paid employee staffed the facility overnight, while other staff handled daytime cleaning and laundering chores. Men could use the shelter not more than 90 nights per year, a restriction that was lifted only during extreme weather conditions, and that meant many guests conserved their nights for cold or rainy nights by spending milder evenings outdoors. And if men showed up under the influence, they were turned away, part of a strategy meant to ensure peace and safety in a small and crowded space. All of that changed in 2020. Public health risks, as I noted, forced the closure of the church shelter. And while Dane County busied itself with organizing hotels for more vulnerable populations, the city moved quickly to set up the first of a series of temporary alternative men's shelters. Something we thought we might need for just a few months until things blew over. We settled first on the Warner Park Community and Recreation Center, and within weeks, city engineering staff converted it to an overnight shelter with capacity to safely serve about 100 people. This would be the first of many Herculean tasks that agency would perform. Cots and beddings were purchased, donated meals gave way to catered meals, laundry service was outsourced, staffing was increased, including for security. Madison Metro provided daily transportation. Health screening was added at intake. In many respects, Warner Park was a much improved venue. At the same time, we also turned our attention to convincing people that needed shelter to use shelter, in part by beginning to remove some of the barriers to access. The first to go were the 90-day limit and the sobriety requirement. By year's end, the shelter moved out of Warner Park to the former fleet maintenance facility on First Street, which offered twice the capacity. And then 2 years later, as plans for the public market moved forward at that location, the city acquired a property near Easttown on Zaire Road, where the shelter operates to this day. Each site offered more space and improved amenities and taught us lessons about shelters and how they function and what's important to them. Utilization surged from 90 a night to 300 and more. Not only were more people using shelter, but they were using it for longer periods of time. And with those increases, of course, came rising costs. The once $600,000 annual budget grew to $2.4 million in 2022, then to $2.5 million, then $2.7 million, and pushed through the $3 million mark in 2025. Again, all of this possible only with the benefit and access to federal ARPA funding. And so perhaps not entirely intentionally, the city's role in the men's shelter had evolved from something of a passive supporter to a primary backer. And that role took hold really in the first year of the pandemic, when it became clear that a return to church basements was not a viable long-term option. Mayor Rhodes Conway, in partnership with former County Executive Joe Parisi, ended years of unproductive talks about the need for better shelter space by directing staff to develop a plan for a permanent replacement. After a prolonged citywide search for a suitable location, the city purchased a property on Bartleland Drive off North Stoughton Road in 2021, which the council later designated as the site for the new shelter. Next came the selections of an engineering and design consultant. We selected Dimension 4, a local entity, and a facility operator, to nobody's surprise, Porchlight. A team that was comprised of staff from city engineering, from the Community Development Division, from Dane County, from Porchlight, and the design consultant conducted research, including visiting and meeting with shelter operators across the country. The team also made a concerted effort to solicit community input. We reached out to residents and business owners in the vicinity of the site. We reached out to community partners that serve unhoused men, and we reached out to people with lived experience, people that were or had in the past used shelter services, and people who experienced homelessness but had for one reason or another opted not to use shelter. We wanted to learn from them what was most important to them in designing a shelter to meet their needs. How did we engage? We sought input through surveys. We conducted focus groups, small focus groups, interviews with individuals. Much of this work was conducted by a consultant. Shopworks Architecture was the name, the group out of Denver that was part of the engineering consultant team. They brought to this effort many years of experience in trauma-informed design. What did we hear? By far the top issue was safety. Personal safety and the safety of personal possessions. People expressed concerns about the discomfort and the fear that often exists in crowded spaces that are occupied by people experiencing trauma. People also spoke of their hopes to get the individual help they would need to get back on their feet and back into housing, help that was generally unavailable in an overnight shelter setting. That need for space for services was echoed by service providers, and of course the entire discussion took place against the backdrop of limited resources. But how did the input that we gathered influence the design? Much of it shaped key elements of shelter design, and I want to just highlight a few points. Most notably, the design replaces the traditional model of providing a single large sleeping area with one that offers multiple smaller spaces to reduce crowding and congestion and opportunity for conflict. It offers separate spaces for people best served apart from the general population because of health or mobility or behavioral issues. The design provides secure storage space and electrical outlets at each bed site. It includes flexible spaces suitable for meetings in private if necessary with service providers. And the design incorporates a number of features, geothermal heating system, solar panel array, lighting controls, a stormwater recycling system, a commercial kitchen, all of those intended to minimize the ongoing costs to operate the facility. And yes, it is built to serve 250 guests a night. A decision arrived at after taking into account advice that we received from other shelter operators about safety and management considerations. It took into account implications for facility and operating costs, and it took into account 35 plus years of experience in this community with levels of homelessness. The initial cost estimates put forth upon completion of the design work, and which included everything from property acquisition to engineering and design costs and construction, came in between $23 and $24 million. I mention that to push back against the narrative that has arisen from time to time that this project has run substantially over budget. That simply is not accurate. The final $27 million project cost is being financed through a combination of city funds, including some city-administered ARPA funds, by county funds, and thanks to the work of Congressman Pocan, by federal funding. And now we want to take just a moment to give you a peek at the facility, some of the details of it, the structure of it, and I'm going to turn that over to Lynette.
All right, we'll give Jim a little break. He's coming back, so I only get a few slides. All right, so this is the rendering of the outside of the building if you're looking at the site from Bartillion. We have worked with Dimension 4 in ensuring that we have this beautiful and welcoming space. I do want to mention, because that slide that had those key takeaways and those dates was very small print because we were trying to get a lot in there. But I wanted to emphasize two of those dates, which was September and May in 2023. We twice went out and did public information meetings with both the Community and Homeless Services Consortium. It was really important for us, before we even had final designs, that we were just explaining to the community most likely what will happen on that site, what most likely would be the square footage on that site. And then in May, when we finally had these floor plans, as you see, we wanted to bring these floor plans out again to our Homeless Services Consortium service providers and to the community at large. So we sometimes don't do that much robust community engagement for some of our city projects, but this was one project we felt it was really important to go above and beyond in communicating what that capacity would be as we were developing it. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the design of this building. As we keep talking about it as a purpose-built shelter. I think this is really important for us as well, of thinking about, again, that feedback that Jim just mentioned from the service providers and the people that were going to utilize the space, how they would feel most comfortable in the space in seeking services. In our community, we have an old school, which Salvation Army is using as their site, which they converted. When I first started at the city, it was mattresses in the hallway is where families were sleeping in that site. As we mentioned at Grace, it was individuals just getting roll pads and just sleeping sometimes on church floors. When we are just trying to convert those temporary spaces to a place where people can access like quality services, we really need to think of this purpose-built kind of mentality. I also just want to mention, as Jim went through our stages of building temporary spaces, for instance, at First Street and at Zaire, we spent over $1 million in just converting those temporary spaces into habitable places for people to be overnight. And it still isn't good enough in the fact that we have to have catered meals come in because we don't have acceptable places to have, a commercial kitchen or food brought in. So again, I'm just kind of emphasizing the importance of this purpose-built and this design, thinking about the space and how we can best utilize the space. So if we're looking at the floor plan, this is the first floor. We're starting from the left, and the blue area, that is the guest intake area. Again, pre-pandemic at Grace, individuals lined up outside. If anyone was walking by that shelter, you would have a long line of individuals waiting to get into that space. We really try to think about the weather in Wisconsin and how people are interacting and standing in line to go through and get checked in. So this is a very broad and open space for individuals to access security and porch light as they're getting checked in. In this space, we thought about the needs for a restroom. There's a restroom there. Again, we've had to think in some of our temporary spaces about having porta potties where people are entering those temporary spaces. So again, trying to think of these better access to amenities as people are using the space. There is a bed bug room in this space as well. Again, feedback from guests of bringing their stuff in or sharing space around other individuals and having access to that kind of safety amenity and health amenity. If someone were to go I'm going to go with north or up on the floor plan as we're looking at it. That is the staff area. So we have about 5 offices in that area where Porchlight or other service providers and partners of Porchlight can have private office space to work with individuals on housing navigation, employment, resources, any of those things that will be deemed as case management for individuals to access. We also have an area up there for Porchlight staff to have their own individual kind of break area as well. Working with this population is hard. We have seen a lot of turnover, especially since the pandemic, of individuals working in this space at a variety of our nonprofits. So we really want to make sure that we are supporting the staff that would be on site with access to their own spaces where maybe they need to de-escalate at times or seek a place for them to take a break. If we go further to the right of the floor plan, you'll see there is a conference room and a flex room. We were trying to make the space as versatile as possible. So conference room in a place where Porchlight staff could maybe access that space. Conference room could be used also for individual group sessions and so forth. Also, that flex space is there for those same purposes, a much larger area where group sessions or larger group sessions could happen. As we continue to flow to the right into that kind of teal and brown area, that is where you will see kind of what we'll call the dining area and also what we call day use space. Again, we are putting a commercial kitchen in here. One of our lessons learned, especially being at the 2 Warner Park, First Street, and Zaire, so the 3 temporary sites, is the need to ensure that there is some type of kitchen available on site. So food prep and food preparation can happen, and it will help with those costs rather than catering meals in-house for individuals. Again, just thinking about this space, we try to make it open and we try to make it flexible that when it is not in use for dining, it could be in use for other purposes. Also in this area, there are some small black circles right by and underneath that flex room. That's where our computer banks would be. In making sure people can access those resources as needed. Again, this is a great resource for job search, housing search, those kinds of things. Right next to those computer banks, you will see two smaller rooms, which we are calling telehealth rooms. As we expanded our services at the temporary sites, Porchlight expanded their relationships. One of those relationships was an opportunity to work with our local provider, Tellurian. Tellurian was providing kind of that telehealth and medical options for individuals who identified that they needed to speak with somebody. We wanted to make sure that those conversations were happening in a much more private space than what they are happening now at the temporary facility. I'm going to continue going to the right, kind of in those brown areas as people are looking at the colors, and that is largely the full side of the right of the side of the building is the commercial kitchen area. Again, there's a lot of area for the food prep, and then a lot of area for food storage, hoping that we can make sure we have good quality relationships with the food pantries in our area. Any type of food donation that's coming from the community, we actually will have a place that we don't have right now to store those resources. We have talked with Porchlight, and our goal with that commercial kitchen is also to ensure that we are creating job training opportunities in that space as well. And then another relationship that we have formed related to that commercial kitchen is work with Madison College that we hope that we can continue as well. As they have a culinary program, we really hope that Porchlight and Madison College can continue to build that relationship together. Now going to the kind of south side of that building as we're looking at the floor plan, that is really where the day space is in the teal area. Again, thinking about how if individuals are there 24/7, making sure they have access to be in spaces where they can engage with other individuals throughout the day. We have on both the right side and the left side of that teal day space area, those are additional sleeping areas. So when I get to the second floor is majority of those sleeping pods, those smaller sleeping areas. But thinking about the need for individuals who may not be suitable to be in a bunk bed situation, we call the room to the right the ADA accessible area. Those are individual kind of sleeping cots. There are about 16 that we anticipate that will be in that room. They are wide areas in which if an individual is in a wheelchair, in a walker, any of those things that maybe create some mobility issues, this will be a more adequate place for them to possibly be than in the larger sleeping pods. To the left of the day area where we have what's called the isolation quarantine, we also have been calling it the medical respite area. One of our survey groups that we met with was medical providers in the community. And medical providers that specifically work with individuals experiencing homelessness. And right now thinking about the fact that individuals are released from our hospital system at times and asked to just utilize that shelter space. Sometimes this is not, being in a large group setting is not the most appropriate place for them to be. So we wanted to make sure there was separate space, not just for them to utilize for sleeping in, but there is a nurses station. We've talked a lot, for instance, with Madison Street Medicine, who currently does their foot clinics at the temporary site, ensuring that they would have the proper space in that floor plan so they could continue to provide the much needed services of medical support, their foot clinics and so forth, administering any type of prescriptions and so forth. Those rooms, besides just kind of 6 beds that are for that isolation and quarantine. We do have 4 individual rooms as well that have in their own bathroom area. Again, we're just trying to respond to how we can make sure that we are providing those quality services for individuals that may not be successful being with the general population of that second floor. We are currently meeting, Dane County and Porchlight meet on a very regular basis, almost once a month. Sometimes a smaller group even meets more than once a month, to really start talking about all of the programming that will be in these spaces as well. So understanding how individuals would get kind of surveyed of, do they need to be in a medical area versus the general population? So those conversations are happening right now with Porchlight as we are using our experiences, again, from our temporary shelters to give us best advice in moving forward for those new policies as well. The second floor is mainly those sleeping areas. So the second floor has 5 pods, that we'll call them. So that is about 40 to 50 beds that will be up there. This is also the main area where we will have those bathrooms and showers for individuals to access. For that safety and security, there will be a staffing station for Porchlight, both on the left side and the right side of the building. So individuals have eyesight on those pods throughout the night. I talk with my hand and I just whip that. So also on that second floor, we will have laundry. Again, working with Porchlight on what that programming would be for laundry. Right now, for example, Catholic Charities at the Beacon heavily relies on volunteers to run their laundry program. So laundry might not be available day one for individuals to access and all guests to access laundry, but we are working on ensuring, since we have that space, maybe similar to how that space is accessed at Zaire, what are those emergency reasons or kind of policies around the laundry. And then the final thing, small but very important for Porchlight, is the second floor has large area for future donations. As people want to donate to the shelter, we have made sure that there is adequate room for storage on that second floor. So I just wanted to show some pictures of what the grounds look like right now. This is the exterior from the spot where the old McDonald's was. So this is actually going to be the back of the building where the parking lot will be. So that would be the staff entrance, and individuals would go around the building for the guest entrance. Highway 51 is to your right there. This is then the site, if you are standing on Highway 51, it's actually the site if you are standing on the future bike path. Engineering was able to work with partners to ensure that we had good amenities around the site, and there is a bike path going along that path. Between 51 and where the shelter will be located, and where that red line is on the second picture. This is a picture of that intake space. So you can see I'm kind of standing at the door where individuals will first walk in, thinking about the high ceiling structure and having it be an adequate place. There are stairs that people can go up to that second floor there. We also have 2 elevator bays that people can access elevators to get to that second floor as well. The picture to the right is when you get to the second floor, looking down on that intake area. Now showing pictures of what the kind of sleeping pods would look like. These are the walls as they are right now. You can see that they're kind of the smaller walls, and then there's a large wall that breaks up each of the pods. The picture to the far right is a rendering. It's not the actual picture, just so that you can kind of see what it would look like once beds go against those walls. There will be a locker station between each of those beds, again, trying to create some privacy between each of the cots. And there is a plug at each of those beds as well. This is not the greatest picture, but I wanted to show the picture because it's the best picture I have to start showing what the overall space looks like. So this is me standing in the brown area where the kitchen is going to be. I am looking out of what's going to be a garage door that will come up when food and the kitchen is being utilized. And so that will be the space that is the dining hall. I was someone that was pleasantly surprised when I look at floor plans. Everything looks like a Barbie house and very small. So this picture to me represents kind of that how large the space really is in real life. As you look throughout that dining hall with a lot of things. When we last toured, the kitchen equipment had not been delivered yet, but those will probably be some of the next pictures that we receive is that kitchen equipment starting to get moved into that space.
Okay, we're entering the home stretch here, and I'm going to apologize in advance if this last part comes across as a little speechy or a little preachy. We've been at this since before the pandemic. Have invested a lot of time and energy and emotion into it. So here goes. We've come a long way from the shelter that operated out of the basement of Grace Episcopal Church. None of us asked for the disruption that COVID-19 brought to our homeless services system, but its emergence created a crisis in that system, and the city took actions that were needed, literally, to save lives. Granted, we were able to do so mostly through the availability of large sums of federal funding. But the pandemic also forced the community to face up to the fact that for decades, we had mostly neglected the needs of a very vulnerable segment of our population, at least from the perspective of humane space. So now we are taking steps to address that too, knowing that this response will need to occur without the benefit of those federal funds. The shelter at Grace Episcopal Church operated on a mere $584,000 annual budget. Today, driven by higher utilization, more robust staffing, including the need for transportation, security, and cleaning services, that budget has grown more than fivefold. And there's another change that has occurred, namely the erosion of private sector support. The shelter at Grace represented a true public-private collaboration between donated space and meals and private contributions. At least half the cost to run that shelter came from private sources, which is by no means extraordinary. Government is rarely the primary funder of shelter operations around the country. We learned that as we did our research. For example, the operators of the shelters that we visited in Minneapolis and St. Paul disclosed that those cities contribute nothing to their current operations. Nothing. Their respective counties provide $1 million a year, but 85 to 90% of what they need to operate their shelters comes from private sources. Here, city and county government leaders have made clear their support for providing a safe and dignified space for men who experience homelessness. They will together, city and county government, bear nearly the entire cost to construct a new shelter. No private funds are involved, but it makes little sense to design and build the facility that we have and not take full advantage of its potential. What can set this shelter apart is not the enhanced functionality of its design, or its sustainable features, or even its attention to the comfort and dignity of those who may have occasion to need it. What can set it apart is its potential as a place at which people that need help can get it, to move on with their lives and return to housing. not unlike the principles of Housing First, that tell us that when people don't need to worry about where they will spend the night, or whether they will be safe, or what might happen to their personal possessions, then they can focus on addressing whatever it might be that separates them from secure housing. The ultimate success of this shelter hinges on our ability to make those same assurances. Our ability to run 24 hours a day, to avoid having to bus people back and forth to an overburdened daytime facility, and to figure out how to draw the resources and services, many of which already exist within our community, to where they are most needed. I know that shelter isn't the right thing for a lot of people. It doesn't work for many people. But this shelter will have the capacity to serve more than 1,500 people a year. More than that, if it can help connect them to housing. It is potentially a very, very big deal. So our challenge is to make the most of this investment, to use the shelter to its full potential. And that's going to be difficult. Here are the cost estimates to operate a full-time shelter, some $4.2 million. And here's what is currently available. Last week's commitment from the mayor, pending approval from this body, puts the city on track to play a major role, a commitment that takes us from contributing nothing pre-pandemic to covering about a third of ongoing costs. And so now our partners, both public and private, need to do their part. We await decisions from our county colleagues, and we welcome the emergence of a Shelter Friends group that is preparing to lead a private fundraising effort. You'll hear more about them later this month, by the way. If we're not able to raise the funds that we need, it will not be possible to operate this facility full-time, and that will diminish its value. So there's a role to play here for city government and for county government and for the private sector. There's an important role to play for the operator of this facility. There are important roles to play for service providers. And yes, there are important roles to play by the people that might have occasion to use this facility. So that's the challenge ahead of us. We've got plenty of work to do between now and the scheduled opening sometime next year. We'll go through our city and county budget processes. We continue to work with county staff and city staff and staff from Porchlight, the operator, on updating operational plans and protocols around day-to-day operations. We have a lot of work to do to understand how to draw resources and services to this facility. There's still plenty of outreach to do, not the least of which is the work of the Shelter Friends in raising private funding. And we've got, of course, the task of naming the building, something that we hope the community will be part of as well. So with that, I am going to stop our formal presentation. I'm sure that there are topics that you hoped might be covered that weren't, or that were covered but not to the degree that you need. And so Lynette and I and others from city staff are here to try to answer those questions. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Jim and Lynette. That was incredibly helpful and grounding. I'm trying to see if anybody is in queue yet to ask you questions. All right, Alder Okovic.
Thank you. You mentioned a bed bug area, I believe. I kind of missed the details on that. I was hoping you could go into a bit more detail on it.
Sure. Best practices have said A bed bug area is a place where individuals can put their belongings in there, so backpacks and so forth, and it heats up a lot that it will supposedly kill all bed bugs. So thinking about as people bring their stuff into the shelters, sometimes their stuff is around other individual stuff, so people don't like to sometimes bring their stuff into the shelters of concern that, and sometimes we do have bed bugs in the shelters. So it will be a room that individuals can access, and Porch Light can put individual stuff in to try to decrease that issue.
Okay. And is it going to be like a hotel where you get a luggage tag if you're putting your stuff in there? How's that going to work logistically?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you at
Sorry.
all.
How's it going to work logistically? Like, if I give you my bag, how am I going to get my bag back? Like, is it going to be like a check your bag?
I mean, you have to check in to access the shelter as it is right now, and you have to go through security because we do not allow, for instance, weapons at the shelter. So yes, we will have to create a policy of those individuals have their stuff put into that room and then given that stuff back once it accesses the room.
Okay. And then if the shelter operates 24/7, does that mean that I could leave my stuff in there for like a few days if I'm staying there for a few days?
Yes, we are hoping that if the shelter is operating at full 24/7, part of our work with Porch Light right now is working on like bed reservation type systems and how individuals will reserve beds and how we will maintain a wait list for that shelter. Again, our family shelter right now has a capacity limit and they maintain a wait list. So we're already working on what are the best practices happening elsewhere in our local community that it's new for the men's shelter, but a process that's being used currently. So we're trying to utilize those best practices. But yes, a bed reservation system is something that we're looking at.
And then last question, could you talk about the transportation? You mentioned the bike lane, but is there a bus route nearby?
So yes, there's a bus route right off of 51 and Wright, kind of right over by Madison College, the BRT stop. And then there's a BRT stop right at Mendota and East Wash.
Okay, so the B line runs that way? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Alder Madison, and then I'll do Alder Ugier.
Thank you. I just have two quick questions. The first one, I'm just curious, how does, with the restaurant grade kitchen and, refrigerators available, can folks store medication? Like things that may need to be kept cool? I don't know if that's even a need now. I'm just curious about it. Like if you're there, if it operates 24/7, if you have to take something that needs.
It will probably, we're still building out what exactly will be in that nurses area.
Okay.
But that is something that probably, we would probably recommend that it's in that nurses area, because that will be a nurses station.
Gotcha. And then my next question, I think it'll be this bed reservation, but if the shelter opens 24/7, because now if you get off of work, but beyond the time where folks are normally checking in, you can still get your bed. But I'm assuming that folks kind of work that out beforehand, and that's kind of the model that you're looking at for if it operates 24/7.
Alder, so fundamentally, this would change from the current operation, which is a drop-in shelter,
Yep.
sort of a first come, first serve, to one that we hope will provide an opportunity for people who use shelter and expect that they would need it on successive nights to be able to reserve their beds so that
Okay.
that they would be able to know that bed would be available.
Gotcha. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna move to Alder Ugier. Can you unmute? Cool.
Thank you, President Vitever. Could you describe how we'd scale operations back if we were not successful with the private funding side of this effort? If we were short $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, what would be the process we'd have to use to adjust operations to match the available funding? Thanks.
It's a very good question, Alder. Ugair, we have received the budget estimates that we have predicated all of our estimates on have come from the current operator, Porchlight. We had asked them to develop budgets under two different scenarios, one in which they would just continue to operate the facility on an overnight basis, and a second in which they would provide the resources needed to keep the building open on a 24-hour operation. So I want to be clear about that. Keep the building open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and make it a venue at which support services are available does not include necessarily any potential costs of what those services might be. I think we are convinced that many of the services that would be desired or needed at this facility are services that already exist within the community. The difficulty is in connecting those services to the people that use the shelter, and it's especially difficult when the shelter asks guests to leave at 8 in the morning. So providing space and providing time to make those connections, that's what this facility offers, at least initially. So the cost, and I understand that there's a recent some modification, the cost to continue an overnight operation only is in that about 3.4. It's a little bit higher than what we have been talking about in the last year or so. Numbers that we have been using are starting to get dated. So that estimate is about $3.4 million. And keep in mind currently at Zire Road, the 2025 budget is in excess of $3.2 million. Porchlight's estimate of a 24/7 scenario raises the cost to about $4.2 million. Now, I will tell you that we continue to work with Porchlight. We continue to review and evaluate and assess and look for opportunities to reduce budgets. That will continue right up until the time that we open. But the best estimates that we have now are about $3.4 million to continue an overnight only operation, and a little bit north of $4 million to operate on a 24/7 basis.
Thank you. And thank you for that really fantastic presentation. Just one other question. If there were an emergency of some sort, heaven forbid another pandemic, but in theory, if we had to, is there enough space there on an emergency basis to significantly expand the number of people that could use it for a period of time?
The easy answer, the best answer, Alder, is no, there is not. That is something else that distinguishes this facility from the First Street, the former maintenance facility on First Street, and from what was once a Gander Mountain retail outlet on Zire Road. Those very large, single-story, expansive spaces had ample room to put more cots down, put more mattresses down if the need arose. We're much more limited in this space. I won't say that there isn't any room for additional capacity in the event of severe weather situations or other types of emergencies, but we go into this understanding that the night-to-night capacity is at or very near that 250 mark.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No other questions.
Alder Mayor.
Thank you. You've already answered some of this question, but I'm trying to understand the fundamental difference between running a 24/7 shelter versus one that's purely nightly or daily. So obviously, like the Beacon or nightly shelter, you have your hours of operation, then people leave, you have a chance to clean and reset the space. It's 24/7, I suppose you have different programmatic areas, so you can do that as well. But will you have people, are people limited to how many days they can stay per month, or either to adequately make those beds available, or how do you operate that?
It's a very, very good question, Alder. It's no secret that the current shelter is operating at about 30% above anticipated capacity of the new shelter. They're routinely seeing more than 300 people. Can you ask your...
I mean, will folks be limited to how many days a month they can
Yeah.
stay if someone wants to stay?
So
Definitely.
there are a lot of reasons for the higher utilization. Among them are policy changes that have been made to eliminate the 90-day limit on number of nights, to welcome into the facility people that might show up at intake under the influence, to be more temperate with suspension and expulsion policies. The idea is to make these facilities available for people that need them. But they have had some perhaps unintended consequences, most notably with respect to your question, Alder, is we've seen a decided increase in the length of stay, the number of nights that people are using the facility. We think that bringing resources, housing resources, and other support to bear that isn't available to most shelter guests now might do a lot to alleviate that shelter. But I think it's fair to say that we're going to need to revisit some of those policies. There's a lot of room between a 90-day limit and no limit at all, and so we're in the midst of conversations with our colleagues in county government and with Porchlight and other shelter providers about how to deal with those kinds of issues.
Thank you. And then one other question there. We know very, very unfortunately that supply is not going to meet demand for this shelter. What does it look like for more people showing up on a given night than you have beds for? Will people being able to reserve ahead of time maybe give people the knowledge that there's not a space, they won't make the trip with knowing that they won't have a bed? Is that part of the idea?
That's certainly the concept, is that, right, that it would be cleared to somebody before they would show up at the facility whether there was space available for them or not. We are still, as Lynette mentioned, very much in the midst of conversations about how to operate. This is new for us, at least for the men's shelter, and so those conversations are ongoing, and certainly by the time we open, we'll have addressed those.
Thanks. And the last question, Alder Ohovich asked something I think similar to this, but you're going to have storage lockers for people who are there. Will they be available if someone needs to leave for an appointment and come back and leave their things? They don't have to carry everything with them.
Yep. The idea is that each bed, and this is something that we saw in the facilities in Minneapolis and St. Paul. They have lockers, secure locker right at the beds, and so those are available for somebody that leaves with the intention of returning. They could leave their possessions behind and know that they would be there when they got back.
But it is connected to having a bed, though. It's not, you don't have like general purpose lockers?
At this point, no, I don't believe that there's space for.
Okay, thank you very
for
much.
those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to Alder O'Brien and then.
Yeah, thank you, President, and thank you, Director O'Keefe. So I was doing some quick math, and it looks like, based on the slides, that we have about 2.657 million that we have accounted for, which is falling substantially short of the 3.4, which is still falling substantially short of the 4.2. What happens, like, if we don't have those funds? What happens to that operation if we're not able to hit 3.4 million? And then I guess a secondary question is how much, actually, I'll just leave it there and then we can come back to the next question.
Alder, we're only in the fifth or sixth inning.
Yeah.
So there are lots of opportunities to drive that number up. I'm confident that that those numbers will rise. As I mentioned, there is a private sector group call themselves Shelter Friends of Dane County. Have been working for some time on a strategy to begin private fundraising. They're very much aware. They're keeping very close tabs to our conversations at the city and county government level, and are expressing a fair amount of confidence that they can help close that gap. If, however, we're not able to raise the funds collectively to run the facility on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis, we'll have to work with the operator to scale that operation back. Maybe it means we can only be open on an overnight basis. Maybe it means that rather than asking people to leave at 8 o'clock, the facility can remain open until noon. Maybe it means that a couple of days a week it's open 24 hours and other days not. There are lots of different variations, and I think as we close in on what funding is likely to be available, we'll be able to have more serious conversations about different options.
Okay. And so that also, like in that variation of funding, if there is like a cold snap or extreme hot days and we don't hit the full 24 hours, you do think there is enough flexibility to be able to keep it open on some of those longer days or on some of those like colder days or hotter days when there is more emergency needs? Potentially.
The best that I can say right now, Alder, is that that will be part of contingency plans. I know there's some anxiety about capacity and how are we going to handle things, and certainly having a contingency plan in the event of very severe weather. We have other options, other resources that are available in those instances, but that'll be part of the planning.
Okay. Thank you.
Discussion.
Alder Verveer and Alder Pritchett, you'll be on deck.
Thank you, Council President. First, let me thank you, Lynette and Jim, for your presentation tonight, but moreover, thank you for all of your years of heartfelt dedication in this endeavor. I know it's a real vocation for both of you, so thank you. I know that this is not easy. Many of my questions have been asked and answered already. Would it be easy to bring the PowerPoint back up and ask you to bring up a specific slide or two, Lynette, please? That is doable. So perhaps just starting with the slide on revenues for current year and projections for next year for 26. So it was toward the end of the presentation, might be the first place to start. Perfect, thank you very much. So, and apologies if this kind of has already been covered as much as you were able to share, the two of you, but, and I know we'll likely know a lot more perhaps in the next 24 hours from our friends here in the building with the county, but can you just share to start out with where the current estimate from the county that $607,000 comes from?
Yes, Alder. That number represents what was contained in the Department of Human Services budget recommendations to the county executive.
I see.
The base level funding for Dane County had been about $525,000. We were, and you might recall from previous conversations that they had committed beginning in 2024 about $175,000 to support the operations at Dairy Drive, with the understanding when that decision was made that those funds would move over to support the shelter upon closure of Dairy Drive. That appears not to have happened. I know that that county agencies are facing requests to scale back their budget, and this reflects the Department of Human Services recommendations on how to handle that reduction.
I understand. And am I correct that we likely will, the county executive's proposed budget will be released within the next 24 hours publicly?
I believe it's scheduled to be released tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then looking at the porch light, both current year and projected for next year contribution, can you go back historically and share how much porch light was able to dedicate toward this part of their mission in terms of operating the men's drop-in shelter, even prior to the pandemic? Do you remember historically how much they
sure
contributed toward that?
Yep, I sure do, Alder Verveer, and I'll just be candid. It's to this point one of the more disappointing aspects of this project. Porch Light, when the shelter operated out of the basement of Grace Episcopal Church, contributed $200,000 a year, their private fundraising. They have other, in fairness, they have other activities, other services, other things that they do for which they need to raise funding. But they have been resistant to this point, to increasing their own direct fundraising contribution beyond that $200,000 mark.
Yeah,
I'll add.
Yes, thanks,
I
Lenny.
think that is specifically why the Friends, the group of the shelter, has been formed in recognition that someone needs to lead a fundraising effort, and in hopes that this Friends group can kind of lead that effort, as Porch Light can focus on other mission-driven things that they have, such as their permanent housing.
Yeah, thank you, Lynette. You anticipated my next question, and that is, I know that I guess Jim, you in particular, during the presentation has mentioned the Friends group a couple of times and said that we'll hopefully be hearing something more concrete in the coming weeks. But to start out with on that point, could you explain the relationship between the somewhat recently formed Friends group and Porch Light? From my individual conversations, they've actually almost to a person been with current Porch Light board members that have talked about the private fundraising and pledges that they're trying to raise. Is there a formal relationship between the two? Is there significant overlap? Can you just share additional information about the Friends group? And again, what the relationship is are they fundraising with regular collaboration and coordination with Porch Light on a daily basis then?
So Alder, I am not comfortable today disclosing the membership of the Friends group. Particularly given that they're going to go public within the next few weeks. They have been. I mean, these are folks that are longtime, well-known, established names in the community. You will recognize the names of folks that are involved in this. They're still very much trying to establish themselves as a going concern. So I would really, if it's all right, I would really rather not talk about specific members.
Yeah, and I guess I wasn't asking that, Jim. Sorry if I didn't say that very well. I was just curious if, again, the relationship between the Friends group and Porch Light primarily, and because again, the people that have talked to me about it are actual Porch Light board members currently, so, without naming any names.
So there is some overlap between the Porch Light board and the Friends group.
But from your conversations with Carla and the leadership at Porch Light, though she or they are only able to commit $200,000, and any remaining commitment would have to come from the Friends Group if it wasn't public funding. Is that fair to say?
Yes, the response to date from Porchlight, from the board and leadership at Porchlight, is that they're prepared to offer not more than $200,000 a year of their own private fundraising, and anything beyond that will need to come from some independent effort. And it is that independent effort that the Friends Group is organizing around to undertake. Am I answering your question, Alder?
Yes, and I'm sorry if I feel like I'm putting you on the spot. Don't.
No, and so Porchlight, Porchlight has been, and Porchlight staff has been a resource to this group, just as we have been a resource to this group, and on occasion, county staff have been a resource to this group to help them understand sort of what this is all about, and what the resource demands are, and how things need to work. We're very much collaborating with them and working together, including the operator, including Porchlight.
Thank you. And then could you just share with us kind of the history of Porchlight indeed being the designated operator for the purpose-built men's shelter? And specifically what I'm wondering about is, both of you well recall, there were very, very preliminary conversations about, well, shouldn't Catholic Charities and Porchlight join forces and perhaps be a joint operator of this facility? That, again, obviously, I think everybody here knows, everyone listening knows that Catholic Charities operates the Beacon Day Resource Center on East Washington Avenue, but a potential of kind of merging the operations and bringing the full forces and the fundraising of Catholic Charities to bear here, with our goal of, again, this being a 24/7 operated facility. Could you share, if I'm remembering that correctly, but moreover, how Porchlight became designated as indeed the operator, and that there wouldn't be a kind of joint operation or coalition, and whatever you're comfortable saying about Catholic Charities would be appreciated.
So Porchlight has operated the men's shelter in this community for as long as I can remember.
1980s.
Well before, yep.
Yeah.
And it was just natural when the Grace Shelter was relocated to the various temporary sites that they would follow. It's been now a couple or 3 years, I don't remember exactly the year, that we put out the city put out a formal request for qualifications for operators, or for somebody to operate the new shelter. We did that, we wanted to do that ahead of the design development because we wanted the operator to be involved in that design. So we undertook that process, and Porchlight was selected as the operator. You're right, Alder, that there had been some anticipation that Porchlight would join with Catholic Charities in a joint application, joint venture. As it turned out, there was turnover in leadership at Catholic Charities at right about this time. And so I think there was some uncertainty on the part of Catholic Charities leadership. There certainly were concerns about the financial implications of this venture. I don't think it's any secret that Catholic Charities works very hard to raise private sector funding for their work at the Beacon. So I think all of those things led a new leadership group to hit pause on that. But I can tell you that conversations remain open, contacts remain open, and conversations continue with Catholic Charities about a potential future role at this shelter, particularly if it is operating at something more than an overnight capacity.
Yeah, thank you. What do you two think is the future of the Beacon if we can reach our goal of operating this new facility 24/7? It's kind of heartbreaking to see the gentlemen lined up every day, getting on the shuttle buses, the school buses, back and forth currently between Zaire Road and East Wash. Well, technically East Main Street in the back of the building there, but do you foresee that as continuing once the new facility opens?
Early on, Alder Verveer, there was a time that I thought that standing up a 24/7 shelter operation at a new facility would obviate the need for the Beacon. I no longer believe that, in part because there is not perfect overlap between those that use the shelter and those that use the Beacon. There is considerable overlap, and so I don't think there's any question that if people have a space at a shelter at which they seek services, to also receive support services during the daytime, they'll take advantage of it. I think this has the opportunity to take a lot of pressure off the Beacon, which is right now overwhelmed, both from a physical space standpoint and from a staffing standpoint. So these two facilities are very much related. I don't know that we'll necessarily get to a point where we won't need the Beacon, but it's certainly going to make, I think, that operation a lot more effective and efficient, and hopefully ours too, if we're not in a position of having to, put 100 or more people on the bus twice a day and send them to a different location.
Yeah, thank you. Let me pivot to my last question, and appreciate everyone's indulgence with time here. Lynette, could you go to, I think it's just the previous slide, about expenses? Yes, thank you. That's it. So it was kind of, and I appreciate, Lynette, when you were walking us through the plans for the new facility, spoke at some detail about the kitchen, a commercial grade kitchen and so forth, and hopefully training opportunities with Madison College and others for the folks there. But it is eye-popping when you see the line item for food of $250,000 approximately, $750,000 approximately. I'll just share with my colleagues that I was one of the countless volunteers that served food at Grace on a regular basis through my church in the Grace basement before the pandemic. Started as a college student and continued. So for those that don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Lynette and Jim, if I get any of this wrong, but when the pandemic came, obviously for very, very clear reasons, as you went through that history, not only the physical facility change and the Grace and St. John's Lutheran and First Church, First United Methodist Church, all were shuttered as drop-in shelters, but also obviously all volunteer efforts, including most importantly the evening meal and morning meals were dropped by volunteers, obviously all under public health. And correct me if I'm wrong on this part though, ever since the pandemic, pretty much the food has been catered from Iowa County, from High Point Steakhouse in Ridgeway, through a contract with whoever, either Porchlight directly or whatever. With that food line item, is my understanding that Porchlight is saying that they don't believe that they'll ever go back to that operation that worked pretty well, admittedly with way fewer clients than what we're currently seeing on Zaire Road, but where there would be volunteers regularly serving the meals and providing the foodstuffs, that instead it will continue to be a catered food operation for the foreseeable future. Did I get that wrong?
So you are correct. Pre-pandemic, it was 100% church volunteers that would bring in food every night. The average capacity at the shelter pre-pandemic was less than 90 gentlemen a night. So we're looking at feeding about 64 individuals that church group would have to establish a meal for on any given night. So when the pandemic hit and we moved out of Grace, the temporary shelters do not have any kitchen areas. And so because there is no kitchen areas on site, we could no longer even utilize volunteers. Even also with the pandemic, volunteers were under stay-at-home orders as well. So Porchlight has released RFBs, requests for bids, in order to try to engage Food Fight and other local restaurants to cater now what they are anticipating over 300 meals a night. So right now the food budget at the temporary location at Zaire is over $1 million as part of that budget. So this is a cost reduction as we no longer will cater meals in, and we will use that commercial space. Right now, Porchlight has reached back out to volunteer groups, but unfortunately, due to the volume of meals, that is a big difference from them serving, again, an average of maybe between 50 to 60 individuals a night to serving over 300 individuals a night and prepping those meals. Their church volunteerism wasn't as strong coming back out of the pandemic. So it's not that we couldn't potentially, again, as we get final numbers and we start looking at all of the things that we are going to have to create scenarios for, such as maybe volunteers bring in lunch and not dinner. Those are all still options on the table. This food budget includes 2 hot meals a day and a light breakfast. So there is those potentials that we might say we are looking for volunteers to bring in bagged lunches. If it's 24/7, we don't know how many people will actually end up accessing that space during the day. Individuals do leave to go seek other opportunities throughout the day. So this is one of those kind of budget items that in our scenarios might fluctuate a bit, but it's the kind of final numbers of looking at 2 hot meals a day and a light breakfast being served on site.
Thank you. I really appreciate that detailed response and appreciate the fact that Porchlight is very much interested in trying to get volunteers back, because I think that makes a big difference. I think of Luke House on South Ingersoll Street, where, unless I'm wrong on this, it's completely operated. That meal program there is completely operated by volunteers, mostly faith-based. I realize those numbers are also smaller than what you're seeing on Zaire Road by a lot, but anyway, it just seems like it would be a wasted opportunity otherwise. So thanks very much, Lynette. I'll yield with that. So thanks very much, Lynette and Jim, again. Thank you for your indulgence, Council President.
I'll just say, Alder Verveer, you and I are quite aligned, and I've had conversations with Jim about an opportunity to test some things out. So more to come. So let's see, I'm going to Alder Pritchett, and then Alder Elkovitz will be on deck.
So my question centers, go back to the slide that was there before. No, not that one. The one with food, security, that's, yes.
Yeah.
So my question is pretty much a question that centers on public health. And I asked that question, I'm looking at the proposed budget for laundry as well as for cleaning. And the question I want to get to, when we look at laundry and cleaning, and I'm thinking about the relationship that you will have with public health, primarily intake. When you look at going back to the sleeping areas and the number of people who will be in that area, I'm thinking about too, in the dead of winter, when respiratory diseases peak. I'm thinking too about people who come in and we don't have knowledge about, let me back up a second. I'm reminded of having toured the area in New Orleans after Katrina and having toured the area in Houston, Texas after Katrina. I'm reminded of the widespread number of people who contracted illnesses because of proximity. So my question is this: knowing that we have homeless people coming from wherever, and we don't know what they bring with them, what's the propensity then for the spread? Because if we don't address that, then that in and of itself can lead to shutting down the entire building because of spread. So I'm wondering, if we are to maintain the building being open as proposed, then what are we going to do in terms of planning for that kind of an issue? Now, you also mentioned too that on the second floor, if I'm not mistaken, there's a nurse's station. I'm reminded of the question that Alder Madison asked with respect to medications. If we don't have control over an illness that someone does not know they have, do we have or will we have an intake procedure? I'm reminded of working in New York, having to delouse. I'm reminded of laundry. If one person brings it in, that mattress is no good. So it's these kinds of things that we have to worry about. That's a huge problem. So when you think about that budget for that, it comes nowhere near it. So my question again is, are there plans in the works for these kinds of potential issues, and how will it be addressed?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. So right now, we are used to our emergency shelters being congregate shelters. Again, the family shelter and the single women shelter pre-pandemic both operated out of the East Washington site by Salvation Army. The men's was at Grace. While we have moved families to the building that the city bought, and it is now 24/7, and they have more private rooms, both the men and the single women are still congregate spaces. So we work very closely with public health when we know that flu season is here and there's other issues of trying to address those situations. We did that actually pre-pandemic in those congregate settings and even now. So staff really consider, as they are doing intake, looking at kind of some of those preliminary health screenings and figuring out ways that they can address that. We learned a lot from the pandemic, where at that time we had actual tele-nurses that were doing all of the screening at the shelters, addressing if anyone had to go to our COVID medical respite. We don't have those tele-nurses anymore on contract, but we have learned best practices of staff doing intake and addressing some of those situations, making sure that they're educating guests about keeping their distance, trying to encourage guests to wear masks still as possible. I mentioned that on the first floor, so not in the sleeping pod area, but on the first floor, there is still some of that isolation or quarantine that we could use some of those spots at the men's shelter, and then there is a bay in that area. And that's exactly what some of those spaces can be used for, is if we see a spike in the flu season and people are coming in with symptoms, do we have places where we can isolate them from the general public to try to de-escalate those things? So it's a conversation. The shelter providers in our community do meet on a regular basis to address kind of those best practices and policies and so forth. For the kind of, again, the issues of bringing in particular things such as bed bugs or other things that might be on individuals' items. Again, at intake, that is something that staff will be trained to try to assess, to encourage things to go into a room so that we are not kind of, bringing infestation into the shelter as well. But definitely something that is being discussed. In this budget, just kind of going over the operating details, laundry, that is a third-party vendor coming in and doing the laundry of the bedding. So every day someone can come in, and this could change. Again, this is another price point that could change if it's 24/7 and people can reserve their beds. Maybe that laundry isn't being done every single day, but to address just kind of an overnight and individuals coming in daily, they get their blanket and their sheets, and those are returned each day to, again, try to address that people are reusing that laundry service. So that laundry isn't for individual guests, it's for the bedding. The cleaning is really that janitorial services. Again, that's another place where a third-party vendor comes in. Right now at Zaire, they come in during the day and they do intense cleaning on each of the cots that is used that night to try to spray down for sanitary purposes before it is reused by another person the next night. Again, to attempt to try to discourage any type of spreading of germs and those kinds of things. So again, $2 points that could be affected if we have a strong bed reservation system, but we don't know how yet that bed reservation might affect those numbers. But those are those 2 points that we think about of ensuring there's sanitary purposes of bedding and wiping off those mattresses as beds are being reused.
You mentioned the intake procedure. That's going to be a little bit too late. Okay, there should be like a pre-screening. Because once the exposure has taken place, it could lead to a shutdown. I've seen it. And I'm asking, I'm begging that there be a pre-screening. Because if not, the entire building could be hit and hit hard. It's critical. And so when you think about other homeless shelters and thinking about best practices, begin to think about and ask those hard questions about a facility that is now inundated because it's everywhere. And it could be shut down for quite some time if it's not corrected. Thank you.
Okay, Alder Ochovitz, and then President Givens-Rajan will be on deck.
Thank you, President. Hopefully a quick question. For the purposes of categorization that you were talking about earlier, category 1 being literally homeless and category 2 is imminent risk of homelessness, would people in the shelter be considered category 1? And I guess the other question that I'm asking is, for prioritization of services, would people staying in the shelter be treated differently in priority versus people who are not in the shelter?
So yes, category 1 is individuals that are using shelter services, individuals that are in transitional housing, and individuals that are unsheltered. So that is HUD's definition, means that you are not in, a permanent housing situation. And so that is, yes, we would be looking at prioritizing individuals to get into that shelter who are seeking that shelter services that are literally homeless.
All right, thank you.
Vice President Govindarajan.
Thank you.
And then Aldermeyer, you're on deck. Mayor, sorry, excuse me.
Thank you. A lot of my questions have been answered already. Thank you for that. And thank you for the presentation. I really only have one simple question. Earlier, the mayor was talking about how this is going to be serving more than people just in the Madison area. Are there conversations ongoing about funding the shelter with other municipalities?
Although I know the mayor is having those conversations, we are not having those at the staff level.
That is all. Thank you.
Aldermayor, and then I will take the chair's prerogative after that.
Thank you. Two questions. Going off of Alder Govindarajan's, do you have any stats of where users come from outside of Madison to know of that kind of demand? Or is it difficult to?
We really don't. I mean, there's some anecdotal information that is provided by operators. There was a point in time, no pun intended, that the point in time survey did ask questions to try to gain knowledge about where people had lived when they were last housed, but it was more of it didn't provide very good information, and that so much as I know, that question is not asked anymore as part of the point in time survey. So short answer, we don't have good information, and I think part of the reason is that what would shelter, at least as the way that we have been operating, where nobody is turned away, what would people do? What would the operator do with that information? They wouldn't impose a residency requirement or wouldn't turn people away if they were from outside of Madison or outside of Dane County.
We use the homeless management information system is the database that is used in the whole entire state of Wisconsin, and we use it, and we ask that all of our service providers use it. In probably about 2016, we stopped asking the question, what was your last zip code? It was a question that we used to ask, but we found that, again, it wasn't useful in any type of performance measures that we were trying to push developers to do, and people were actually just kind of using it for wrong purposes. What we found at that time overall, especially in families, over 70% of individuals accessing services were from the Dane County area in general. And as Jim said, we weren't going to turn individuals away just because they were coming here seeking services. And it really was, at that time, kind of a push by elected officials saying, once people, kind of come to our community, it's our job to make sure that we can ensure that they get access to those services. We did add 1 year to the point in time that question, are you from Dane County or not? And again, on a one night trying to collect that data, it really was inconclusive.
Sure, I certainly would want that information to be a gatekeeping, but to appeal to those municipalities to say we're serving your members. My other question, you spoke to the transportation connections, and being an avid bus rider, I wanted to see what hooked up there, and I see the L route comes quite close, although that's kind of a circulatory between the north side and Monona, and then the A route, either connection is about a half mile, which can be quite a bit, especially if you're carrying a lot. Have you had any conversations with Metro about altering their service?
We haven't had any conversations with the new Metro director, but it's on our list of things we want to do. Yep.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, prerogative, and then I will go to Alder Harrington McKinney. So let's see. In the money that you said that is the city's portion, is any of that from HUD? I may have missed that. Or is that all city general purpose revenue money? Sorry. Is any of the money that the city is contributing part of the money that comes from the feds from HUD for this purpose?
In what year?
In 26.
In 2026? No, the city contribution would all be city levy, no federal.
Okay, awesome. And then going back to Alder Okovitz's question about like who's kind of in that category one, are the tiny homes that Occupy Madison runs, are those considered still category one? They are. Okay, even though a lot of those folks are really seeing that as a fairly permanent space? Interesting.
Yeah, so for Dairy Drive, that is considered unsheltered still, because as HUD would defined it, those are not residential dwellings. Those are very small pallet shelters, and it is still considered a place that HUD would describe on the point in time as a campground, and a place then that would be inhabitable as a permanent housing location.
But what about the tiny home villages?
So we do have Occupy Madison listed also as an unsheltered due to HUD's regulations.
Okay, thank you. Will folks be able to access medically assisted treatment for substance use on site?
At the shelter?
Yeah.
So right now, Porchlight does work with other support services, for instance, like CABA, recovery services, and we do hope that some of those services at Zaire will transfer over, and they will utilize current contracts, current funding, access to those services at the new site as well.
Will folks be able to park cars, campers, vans on the property?
Shelter guests?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And will shelter guests be able to have visitors on site during the day? So let's say that, they want to get together with a friend, or they want to have a meeting with their child or something. Is that something that's going to be able to happen on the site if it's 24/7?
Well, this is not a residential facility. It's, so it isn't as though people are visiting somebody at their apartment, or I would expect that people at the facility would be there because they are utilizing services, whether it's overnight or whether it's daytime services, and if not, probably wouldn't have any business to be there.
Right, I'm just thinking about so if somebody's going to reserve a bed for a week, for example, and they say, okay, now I have a place to be for this next week so I can see my child. And so they say, can I bring my child here to see me during this week? That's just an example.
I'm going to say we would probably work with them and with a case manager to find an alternative place for them to visit their child versus bringing their child into a homeless shelter.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to move to Alder Harrington McKinney. Can you unmute Alder Harrington McKinney? Fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. And if this question has been asked and answered, please correct me. We've talked a lot about outsourcing and contracting outside of the shelter. Will there be employment opportunities for guests within the facility?
Alder, yes, Porchlight is very much interested in providing employment opportunities for people that use their facility. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right, Alder Madison, and then Alder Pritchett will be on deck.
Thank you. I kind of remember the question I had earlier. So at the recent tour, I had a conversation with a gentleman who I believe served or continues to serve on the Homeless Issues Committee, and he mentioned being part of some early conversations for the permanent shelter. And he was just like really excited about, the progression of it, how it's turning out. And then I had a couple conversations with folks. I randomly just go to the shelter and, chat with folks because it's in my district. But, about the future shelter and their comments about it, and kind of looking forward to some of the, the not feeling like they have to be shuffled around, for example. And I'm just curious, since that gentleman was super excited and other folks seem to be looking forward to it, is there a work or a plan to kind of, I don't know, whether to offer those guys, like the people who use the temporary shelter, opportunity to see it before, just how you invite the public in to see new buildings and spaces. Is there any energy to plan to kind of like share an update with them, even if it's like sharing a presentation at Porchlight, for where it's at and how far it has to go and when it opens? I'm just curious for that.
I would say one of the next steps that we want to do is also of naming the building. So very similar to Catholic Charities when they did a kind of a community outreach to end up with the name The Beacon. We would like to do something very similar. And I will say when we're kind of doing that outreach of collecting ideas of what the name will be, that will be the next opportunity that we would probably have staff at the shelter in engaging with people to, one, get ideas of what the name will be, educate them of, the current progress, show them pictures and so forth. And so that will probably be the next kind of stage of engagement again with people that will utilize the space.
Gotcha. That would be really dope.
All right, moving on to Alder Pritchett.
I know I'm old school, but what about mail? And for many, many homeless individuals, a concern has been, I don't have an address. So my question then is, given that there are time limits for a person to be there, will they be able to utilize the address, if mail is coming for them?
So this may sound harsher than I mean it to, but keep in mind, Alder, that this is a facility that is intended for short-term use. We don't expect and we don't want people to take up residence at the shelter. We want to do everything we can to make their stay there as brief as it can be. And so that would kind of work in conflict, I think, with trying to establish some sort of an identity there for mail purposes.
Yeah, it would do that. But as I said, for a person who is in a homeless shelter and someone, it could be an emergency, it could be whatever, or there's a document that they're looking for, are there, or perhaps are there suggestions, other ways for them to address that? So perhaps maybe there would be resources available for those who are expecting a document.
Yeah.
A document, as I said, I don't want, if there's a very, very important document that they're looking for and they can't get it because they don't have, an address.
Yep.
How would they get it?
Yep. So right now, individuals that are experiencing homelessness can use the Beacon as their mailing address.
Okay.
And so that is exactly one of those points of, if this site becomes 24/7, as we talk about like what services would no longer maybe be at the Beacon, but maybe at the shelter, or maybe there's a reason why we want to keep that at the Beacon so that people aren't transferring their mail, but people can utilize the Beacon right now for mailing, and that is a good place that we would want to kind of keep that service until we kind of figure out some of those details. I will say on voting purposes, people can utilize the address for our shelters right now for voting purposes.
Okay.
So thought that was important to add.
Okay. It's just that I just want to make sure, that we can humanize it. You're not just floating around out there without an address or anything like that. Okay, thanks. I'm done.
At the moment, I have no other alders in the queue wishing to ask questions, which is somewhat remarkable. Oh, go ahead, Alder Givendraj.
I'm just going to ask my same question to the mayor's office because I realized I could have done that. Have there been discussions with other municipalities about funding the shelter?
Wait.
Hold on, Sam.
Did I do the right one?
The system works. The short answer is yes. We've begun having those conversations with a number of the surrounding communities, both in collective settings. There's a couple different gatherings of the various Dane County municipalities, and then we've started to have those one-on-one. I wouldn't say they are conclusory yet in the sense of getting any firm commitments out of folks. Obviously, they're facing their own budget constraints and are not used to chipping in this way, but it hasn't been entirely unpromising. So I think we're trying to characterize that carefully. But anyway, we retain some level of optimism that we might be able to figure out some kinds of support.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I'm seeing no other alders in the queue. Oh, Alder Mayor, go ahead.
I just want to thank council leadership for putting together this session. This has been very informative, I think, and useful.
Great, because we're going to do more of these.
Good.
On other topics, not on this topic again, but on other topics. Great, so if we have no other alders in the queue wishing to ask questions, then we can adjourn. I want to thank everybody for participating, for being here, those who couldn't join us in person for joining online. Again, this is an experiment to try this format of discussions to let us dive deeper into some of our bigger issues. There's some things that we're talking about in terms of sustainability, in terms of keeping our lakes clean, and definitely want to hear from alders about other issues that you would like us to delve more deeply into in these conversations. So please be in touch with myself or Vice President Govindarajan. We really want to try to, create these spaces. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.